People think of ancient Egypt and picture pyramids and pharaohs. Not many picture a cook cracking cumin seeds over a clay pot next to the Nile. And yet, that cook invented techniques that are still in your kitchen today. The ancient Egyptians were building civilization while the rest of the world was still figuring things out. That included food. These are 25 ancient cooking secrets from ancient Egypt that modern families are still using without knowing it. Secret 25. Emmer wheat, the original bread grain. Long before anyone was reaching for all-purpose flour, the Egyptians were growing emmer wheat, one of the earliest cultivated grains in human history, and turning it into bread. Emmer is a hulled wheat, meaning the grain is encased in a tough outer shell that has to be removed before milling. It was more labor-intensive than modern wheat varieties, but it was what the Nile Valley produced in abundance. Egyptian bread made from emmer was dense, chewy, and nutritious. Archaeological analyses of ancient Egyptian mummies have found significant dental wear from eating bread containing silica grit, a byproduct of stone grinding that ended up in the flour. Workers who built the pyramids were grinding their teeth down on the bread that was paying their wages. Emmer wheat has made a quiet comeback in modern artisan baking. Specialty grocers now carry emmer flour under its Italian name, farro. If you've eaten a farro salad or bought emmer bread from an artisan bakery, you were eating the same grain that fed the people who built the Great Pyramid. Secret 24. Baking bread on clay walls. The Egyptians did not have a modern oven with a temperature dial. What they had was a clay oven, called a tanur, that worked by heating a cylindrical clay vessel from the inside and then slapping raw bread dough directly onto the interior walls. The heat of the clay cooked the bread from the outside in, producing a flat bread with a characteristic charred exterior and a softer interior. This technique was not unique to Egypt. Similar ovens appear across the ancient Middle East and South Asia, but the Egyptians used it continuously for thousands of years and refined it considerably. They also baked bread on the floor of the oven's interior, directly on hot coals and in pottery containers set over flames. The tandoor oven used to make Indian naan bread today is a direct descendant of this ancient technology. The method, hot clay walls, dough pressed directly against them, is identical. If you've ever eaten naan from a restaurant, you've eaten bread made by the same method the Egyptians were using 4,000 years ago. The dough recipes are different. The technique is not. Secret 23. Honey as the primary sweetener. Sugar as we know it, refined, white, crystalline, was not available to the ancient Egyptians. Their primary sweetener was honey, and they had developed both wild honey collection and managed beekeeping in pottery hives by at least 2400 BCE. Wall paintings at the Sun Temple of Nusayre at Abu Ghurab, dating to approximately that period, depict beekeepers working with clay hive cylinders. Honey was used in bread, in desserts, in beverages, and as a preservative. It was also used medicinally. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, an ancient Egyptian medical text dating to around 1600 BCE, includes honey in wound treatment protocols. Modern medicine has validated this. Honey creates an antimicrobial environment that inhibits bacterial growth. Manuka honey is now used in clinical wound care for exactly this reason. Secret 22. Salt preservation of fish. The Nile provided an abundance of fish, tilapia, catfish, mullet, perch, and the Egyptians needed a way to store it through periods when fresh fish was unavailable. Their solution was salt preservation, packing fresh fish in brine or dry salt to draw out moisture and inhibit bacterial growth. Salted fish was so central to ancient Egyptian trade that it became one of Egypt's primary export products, shipped throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. The World History Encyclopedia notes that the Egyptians may have invented caviar, preserved fish eggs packed in salt, using gray mullet roe. The product has changed somewhat in sophistication over 4 millennia, but the fundamental technology is identical. Salt draws moisture from the roe, inhibits spoilage, and concentrates the flavor. Every can of salted fish in your pantry is a direct descendant of this Egyptian technique. Secret 21. Garlic as both food and medicine. The ancient Egyptians consumed garlic in quantities that would have made the modern Mediterranean diet look restrained. It was eaten raw, cooked into stews, and administered as medicine for everything from intestinal parasites to fatigue and circulatory conditions. The Ebers Papyrus, an ancient Egyptian medical text from approximately 1550 BCE, contains 22 separate prescriptions that include garlic as a therapeutic ingredient. Historical accounts suggest that the workers who built the pyramids were given rations of garlic to maintain their strength and prevent illness. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, claimed to have seen an inscription at the Great Pyramid recording the amount of garlic, radishes, and onions consumed by the pyramid workers. Though the accuracy of this specific claim has been debated by Egyptologists, what is not debated is that garlic consumption was embedded in Egyptian daily life at every social level. Modern nutritional science has confirmed that garlic contains allicin, a compound with genuine antimicrobial and cardiovascular properties. The Egyptians didn't know why it worked. They knew that it did. Secret 20. Cumin in everything. Walk into any kitchen in the Middle East or North Africa today, and you will find cumin. Walk into an ancient Egyptian kitchen 3,000 years ago, and you would find the same thing. Cumin was one of the most widely used spices in ancient Egypt, used to season bread, meat, lentils, and vegetables, and also administered medicinally for digestive complaints. Seeds of cumin have been found in Egyptian tombs, including in the tomb of Tutankhamun, who died around 1323 BCE, preserved by the dry desert air with enough fidelity to remain recognizable 3,000 years later. Cumin seeds placed in a royal tomb suggest that whoever was packing the provisions for the afterlife considered cumin worth including. That is a reasonable endorsement. Modern research has confirmed that cumin contains compounds with antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. Ancient cooks who used it liberally were getting incidental health benefits on top of flavor. If you season your lentil soup with cumin today, you are doing something Egyptian cooks were doing in the time of Ramesses II. The recipe has changed. The spice has not. Secret 19. The clay pot as the primary cooking vessel. Modern cooks have stainless steel, non-stick, cast iron, and copper. Ancient Egyptian cooks had clay, and they used it for everything. Clay pots were the universal cooking vessel, used for boiling, stewing, baking, fermenting, and storage. They were also used to transport food and to offer food to the gods and to the dead. The properties of clay that made it useful then are the same today. Clay is a poor conductor of heat. It heats slowly and evenly and retains heat long after the heat source is removed. Food cooked in clay tends to be more evenly cooked and retains more moisture than food cooked in metal vessels. Slow, even heat allows flavors to develop gradually. The Mexican cazuela, the Moroccan tagine, the Indian handi, the American bean pot, all are regional variants of the same clay cooking technology that the Egyptians were using 4,000 years ago. The shape varies. The physics is identical. Secret 18. Beer as a daily nutritional staple. Here is a fact that will give modern prohibition sympathizers pause. In ancient Egypt, beer was not a recreational beverage. It was a nutritional staple. It was consumed daily by everyone. men, women, and children, because it was safer than the Nile water, more calorie-dense than water, and packed with B vitamins and protein from the grain. Ancient Egyptian beer was thick, cloudy, low in alcohol, and highly nutritious, more similar to modern fermented porridges than to filtered lagers. Workers who built the pyramids received daily rations of bread and beer as their primary compensation. Beer was so valued that it was used as currency and offered in temple rites. The yeast used for bread and the yeast used for beer were the same organism. Bakers and brewers worked in the same facilities using the same starter cultures. That connection between bread and beer, unified by yeast, runs all the way from ancient Egypt to the craft brewing revival of the 21st century. Secret 17. Lentil and bean stews. Full madams. A stew of fava beans cooked slowly with garlic, lemon, and cumin is the national dish of modern Egypt. It is eaten for breakfast across the country every morning. It is also, based on archaeological and documentary evidence, essentially the same dish that working-class Egyptians were eating in the time of the pharaohs. Fava beans were one of the most widely cultivated crops in the ancient Nile Valley, and they were the primary protein source for people who couldn't afford meat. The ancient Egyptians also cooked lentils extensively, boiling them with onions and spices into thick soups and stews. Lentils appear in tomb paintings and have been found preserved in tomb sites. They were cheap, nutritious, and didn't require livestock. Many of the oldest dishes in the world are bean dishes, food historian Charles Perry has observed. Ancient Egypt provides clear evidence for why. Legumes grow in Nile soil, store easily, cook with minimal fuel, and provide complete nutrition with almost no animal protein required. Secret 16. Foie gras. The Egyptians did it first. Foie gras, the fattened liver of a duck or goose produced by force feeding, is considered a French delicacy. The Egyptians invented it around 2500 BCE. Wall paintings from ancient Egyptian tombs at Saqqara depict workers force-feeding domesticated geese, a practice known as gavage, to fatten them before slaughter. This technique was adopted by Jewish communities in Egypt and eventually made its way, through a long chain of cultural transmission, to the French culinary tradition, where it became a luxury product. The ancient Egyptians did not view this as a luxury. Fat was a valuable energy source, and the fattened liver was simply the most calorie-dense part of a bird they were raising for food. The French elevated it into an art form. The Egyptians invented the technique. Secret 15. Drying fruits in the sun. The Egyptian sun, which makes Egypt itself nearly uninhabitable without the Nile, turned out to be an excellent food preservation tool. Dates, figs, and raisins were dried in the open air, reducing their moisture content to the point where spoilage organisms couldn't grow. The result was a portable, calorie-dense, sweet food that lasted for months and required no special storage. Sun-dried fruit was a significant portion of the Egyptian diet, not as a snack in the modern sense, but as a genuine food source that supplemented the bread and beer baseline of daily nutrition. Figs and dates were also used as sweeteners in cooking, offering an alternative to honey that was more affordable for ordinary households. The organic chemistry of drying concentrates the sugars in the fruit while killing the moisture-dependent molds and bacteria that would otherwise cause rot. The Egyptians didn't understand the chemistry. They understood that it worked, and they used it systematically as part of a food preservation strategy that fed the civilization through lean seasons. Secret 14. Sesame oil. Sesame seeds were cultivated in Egypt from an early period, and sesame oil was pressed from them for use in cooking. Egyptian sesame oil was used much the way modern cooks use vegetable or olive oil, as a cooking fat, as a dressing for prepared foods, and as an ingredient in baked goods. Sesame is native to sub-Saharan Africa and was established in Egyptian agriculture by the New Kingdom period, approximately 1550 to 1070 BCE. The oil pressed from sesame seeds has a distinctive nutty flavor and a high smoke point suitable for various cooking applications. It also resists rancidity better than many other vegetable oils, useful in a hot climate before refrigeration. Sesame oil is now used in kitchens across East Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East. The sesame seeds on modern hamburger buns and bagels are descendants of the same crop the Egyptians were pressing for oil 4,000 years ago. Secret 13. Stuffing birds with spices and vegetables. Modern Thanksgiving hosts. Stuffing a turkey are participating in a tradition the Egyptians were practicing thousands of years earlier with pigeons, doves, and geese. The World History Encyclopedia records that birds were often stuffed with spices and chopped vegetables. The technique works for the same reason it still works, filling the interior cavity of a bird with aromatic herbs and vegetables flavors the meat from inside while the filling becomes a separate dish. It's an efficient use of the cooking vessel, in this case, the bird itself. Secret 12. Vinegar as a condiment and preservative. Vinegar appears in the list of ancient Egyptian condiments alongside salt, cumin, coriander, honey, dill, and mustard. It was used to flavor food and, more practically, to preserve it. The same application that pickled food represents in modern kitchens. Vinegar is essentially wine or beer that has undergone further fermentation by acetic acid bacteria, which convert the alcohol into acetic acid. In Egypt, where wine and beer were abundantly produced, vinegar would have been a natural byproduct that cooks quickly found applications for. The acidic environment that vinegar creates is hostile to most spoilage organisms, which is why pickled foods last considerably longer than fresh equivalents. Every jar of pickles in a modern refrigerator, every bottle of hot sauce, every container of pickled vegetables in an ethnic grocery store is a descendant of this ancient Egyptian understanding that acid prevents spoilage. The specific products are different. The chemistry is identical. Secret 11. Coriander seed as a spice. Coriander seeds, the dried fruit of the cilantro plant, were one of the most widely used spices in ancient Egypt and have been found preserved in multiple Egyptian tombs, including that of Tutankhamun. Large jars of coriander seeds were found in the tomb of Amenhotep II as well. Coriander was used in bread, meat preparations, and medicinally. Egyptian medical papyri list it as a treatment for digestive disorders, which modern research partially supports. Coriander contains compounds that relax digestive tract spasms and reduce bloating. The spice carried genuine therapeutic value alongside its culinary applications, in the way many Egyptian herbs and spices did. Coriander seed is now used in Indian, Mexican, Middle Eastern, and European cuisines. It is one of the most widely used spices globally. Every time you reach for ground coriander to season chicken or add to a curry, you are using a spice whose culinary applications were being refined in Egypt while the pyramids were being built. Secret 10. Mortar and pestle grinding. The mortar and pestle is one of the oldest kitchen tools in continuous use. The ancient Egyptians used stone mortars with heavy pestles to grind grain into flour, crush spices, and prepare medicinal preparations. The basic design has not changed because it does not need to. Modern cooks who grind spices by hand rather than using pre-ground products are using the same tool for the same reason as an Egyptian cook 3,000 years ago. Freshly ground spices release volatile aromatic compounds that pre-ground spices have already lost. The Egyptians didn't know about volatile aromatic compounds. They knew that freshly ground spices tasted better. That is still true. Secret 9. Slow braising meat in clay pots. In a kitchen without temperature control, no dial, no thermometer, no adjustable flame. Slow, low-heat cooking in a covered clay pot was the most reliable method for producing consistently edible results from tough cuts of meat. The Egyptians braised extensively, covering clay pots and placing them over low-burning wood fires or burying them in hot embers. Braising, cooking tough cuts of meat in liquid at low temperature for extended periods, is exactly what modern slow cookers, Dutch ovens, and tagines do. The collagen in connective tissue breaks down into gelatin with gentle heat over time, making tough meat soft and deeply flavored. The ancient Egyptian experience was empirical. Slow and covered produced better results than fast and uncovered. Same outcome, different explanation. Secret 8. Date wine and grape wine fermentation. Egypt produced wine from grapes in the Nile Delta as early as 3000 BCE, and date wine, fermented from the abundant fruit of the date palm, was produced across the country wherever grapes were unavailable or expensive. Wine was primarily a drink of the wealthy elite. Ordinary Egyptians drank beer, but the fermentation technology was understood and applied to multiple fruit sources. Grape wine amphorae found in Egyptian tombs have been chemically analyzed and found to contain tartaric acid, a compound that forms during grape fermentation, and residues of herbs and other additions that suggest some wines were flavored in ways that prefigure modern wine production. Labels on some ancient Egyptian wine jars indicate the vintage, the producer, and the region of origin, arguably the earliest examples of what we would now call wine labeling. Secret 7. Roasting on open embers. Not everything the Egyptians cooked went into a pot. Meat, vegetables, and especially certain roots were roasted directly on or near open coals without any intermediate vessel. The lotus root, for example, was roasted directly in hot embers for approximately 10 minutes until it caramelized and softened. Roasting directly on coals creates the Maillard reaction, the browning process that produces the characteristic flavors of caramelized meat and vegetables. The Egyptians had no name for this chemistry, but they understood that fire-roasted food had a flavor that boiled food did not, and they used both methods strategically. Every modern backyard grill doing direct coal cooking is using the same technique. Secret 6. Lettuce as both food and sacred symbol. Lettuce, specifically the tall, elongated variety known as kaus or romaine lettuce, which originated in Egypt, was one of the most important vegetables in ancient Egyptian culture. It was eaten raw, used in religious offerings, and associated with the fertility god Menexte. Egyptian kaus lettuce was larger and more robust than the varieties most commonly eaten today, with a slightly milky sap that gave it a slightly bitter flavor. Romaine lettuce takes its name from Rome, which is where European cuisine encountered it after the Greeks and Romans adopted Egyptian agricultural varieties. Its origins are Egyptian. Every Caesar salad made with romaine lettuce is built on an Egyptian agricultural contribution. Secret 5. Pickling and salt brining vegetables. Beyond fish, the Egyptians pickled and brined vegetables using salt and acidic liquids to extend their usability beyond the fresh season. Cucumbers, onions, and other vegetables were packed in brine, preserving both texture and nutrition by inhibiting spoilage organisms. The global tradition of pickled vegetables, from Korean kimchi to American dill pickles to Indian achar, rests on the same fundamental technology: salt, acid, and oxygen exclusion. Egypt was applying this to food preservation thousands of years before any of those regional traditions developed. Secret 4. Using fat for flavor and cooking. Animal fat was the primary cooking fat in ancient Egypt, used in pots for frying and sautéing, used to enrich bread doughs, and stored in pottery jars in quantities that archaeologists have found at numerous settlement sites. Goose fat, beef fat, and mutton fat were all documented cooking fats. The modern cooking world is slowly returning to animal fats after decades of vegetable oil dominance. Goose fat is fashionable in European restaurant cooking. Duck fat is prized for roasting potatoes. Lard never lost its position in traditional Southern American cooking. The Egyptians understood empirically that animal fat produced results in cooking that plant oils sometimes did not. Secret 3. Carob as a natural sweetener. Carob, the pod of the carob tree, Caratonia siliqua, was used as a sweetener in ancient Egypt as an alternative to expensive honey. The Egyptian hieroglyphic for sweet or pleasant was depicted as a carob pod, Nejamur Bener, which tells you how fundamental carob was to their understanding of sweetness. Carob pods are naturally sweet, with a flavor that resembles chocolate in some preparations, and were ground into powder or used whole to sweeten drinks, breads, and desserts. Carob powder and carob chips are sold today as a natural chocolate alternative. The product is essentially the same. The 4,000-year gap is a detail. Secret 2. Fermentation for preservation and flavor. Beer and bread were the pillars of the Egyptian diet, and both depended on fermentation, the action of yeast and bacteria on sugars to produce carbon dioxide, alcohol, and organic acids. The Egyptians understood fermentation as a practical technique thousands of years before anyone understood the microbiology behind it. But Egyptian fermentation went beyond bread and beer. They fermented fish sauce, similar to the Roman garum, by allowing salted fish to break down under controlled conditions into an intensely flavored liquid used as a condiment. They fermented dairy into yogurt and cheese. They fermented grape juice into wine. Modern food culture's embrace of fermented foods, kombucha, kimchi, yogurt, sourdough, miso, aged cheese, is a return to something the Egyptians never stopped doing. The specific products differ. The microbial principle is the same. Secret 1. Cooking as an offering. Food has always been about more than eating. The most pervasive ancient Egyptian cooking secret that modern families still practice, without usually thinking of it in these terms, is that food is not just nutrition. It is expression, identity, ritual, and connection. The ancient Egyptians offered food to their gods in temple rites and placed it in tombs for the dead to eat in the afterlife. Banquets were organized according to social hierarchy, with the highest status guests given the best seats and the best food. Certain foods were eaten at certain times for reasons that were simultaneously practical, cultural, and religious. What was placed on the table communicated something about who you were and what you valued. Modern families who cook a specific dish for a holiday, who make a recipe that belonged to their grandmother, who serve food at a funeral or a wedding that carries meaning beyond its flavor. These are participating in the same fundamental human behavior that the Egyptians were practicing when they buried pomegranates and dates and wine jars with their dead. Food is how humans communicate across time. The Egyptians were among the first to understand that clearly. And 4,000 years later, that understanding is still sitting at every table where a family gathers to eat together. 25 secrets. Some of them in your spice cabinet right now, some of them on your breakfast table this morning, some of them in the technique you use without realizing it came from a kitchen in the Nile Valley. Ancient Egypt built the first great civilization, and they built it partly on a food culture sophisticated enough that its descendants are still feeding people today. The next time you season your lentil soup with cumin, or slow cook something in a covered pot, or reach for the honey instead of the sugar, you're doing something people were doing by the banks of the Nile before the pyramids were finished. If this one was worth your time, hit the like button and subscribe. we cover history through the things people ate, built, and left behind. More coming soon.